everyone, welcome back to the Critic-Verse. Today we're continuing with our recap and review of Percy Jackson and the Olympians with Season 1, Episode 7, the penultimate episode titled, We Find Out the Truth, sort of. Now, before we get to the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to follow along as we conclude with the rest of the season. Keep updated on all things Critic-Verse and to help me reach my current goal of 500 subscribers. Now, also a little disclaimer, this video does include a brief recap, so I hope you've seen the episode first because there will be spoilers. Now onward to the review. Once again, the episode is titled, We Find Out the Truth, sort of, which gets its name from the 19th chapter of The Lightning Thief. It is in reference to Percy after the main events from the episode puts most of the pieces together and figures out, well, mostly what's going on, except the real answer of who stole the bolt. The episode begins with Percy entering Krusty's waterbed palace. He's greeted by Krusty until they come face to face, and Krusty makes an indirect comment showing he knows who Percy is. Percy is not so subtle and calls Krusty by his full name, Procustus, another child of Poseidon, whose pastime is murdering travelers. The waterbeds are traps to end travelers' lives. Percy wants the secret passage to the Underworld, but Krusty keeps trying to make a sale. Suddenly, Krusty is pushed into one of his own traps by an invisible Annabeth. The secret passageway is a door in Krusty's office with a Do Not Enter sign. As they enter the Underworld, we then get a flashback of Sally bringing Percy to a new school, which is suited for special needs kids. But Percy is making things difficult. Cut back to present day, the trio sees Charon, the ferryman, and attempt to hitch a ride and even try to pay him with the drachmas. But because they aren't dead, Charon summons Cerberus to chase them off. Cerberus grabs Grover, but Annabeth manages to subdue him with dog tricks that she learned in her youth. Grover climbs out of Cerberus's mouth, and they try to figure out a way to get to the top. Annabeth suggests Grover fly them up with the winged shoes, one at a time. Annabeth then throws a ball up to make Cerberus jump after it. Once he reaches the top, she grabs onto the ledge, and Grover and Percy pull her up. Grover then realizes he lost his pearl, but they keep going anyway. Next, another flashback shows Percy's admissions has been revoked because of the event from the first episode when Percy was on the roof looking at the Pegasus. Grover, in present day, volunteers to stay behind, but Percy refuses and insists on being the one to stay instead, with Grover, Annabeth, and his mom leaving. The trio then ends up in Asphodel, a forest that turns souls into trees because of their unfinished business, or in other words, regrets. Cerberus then comes back after the kids, and Annabeth is unable to run as she is now stuck because she has regrets. She tells them to keep going, and from a distance we can see her use the pearl. After making it to the desert, they notice Cerberus has stopped chasing them. But the shoes Luke gave Percy is now pulling Grover into a pit deep in Tartarus. Percy stops this by plunging his blade into the sand, and the shoes then fly off Grover into the pit on their own. They discover the Master Bolt in Percy's bag and theorize that Ares actually stole the bolt and then tricked Percy into bringing it into the Underworld to give to Hades. They enter Hades' castle and find him in his throne room. Percy wants to get right to business, and Percy wants to trade the bolt for his mom. But Hades has no clue what he's talking about, and he doesn't even want the bolt. He wants his helm that apparently someone stole from him and used to steal the bolt, and he believes Percy had it. Percy figured out that it was actually Kronos who planned this, and he is plotting to weaken his children so he can return and take back the power for himself. Hades now desires the bolt to protect himself from Kronos, even offers Percy sanctuary for him, his mom, and Grover. But Percy offers instead to get back his helm in exchange for his mom, and he and Grover use the pearls to escape the Underworld. In the last flashback of the episode, Sally makes an offering which summons Poseidon, and they discuss the fairness of their situation and how difficult parenting a demigod can be, and Poseidon trusts Sally and hears her out. When she asks if he wants to see Percy, it transitions to a voiceover of Poseidon talking about when he'll finally introduce himself to Percy, and Percy waking back up on the beach, being approached by Ares, waiting for a fight. End of episode. Okay, that was a hell of an episode. One of the more visually appealing episodes of the season. So let me give my thoughts on it. As I said a second ago, this episode was visually beautiful. From the design of the Underworld to Hades' palace to the three-headed dog Cerberus. I loved the look of this episode. At the beginning, the actor that plays Krusty also played the embodiment of death on the show Supernatural, so I thought that was just a fun little Easter egg to have him be the killer of travelers. Also, someone else mentioned how much Percy looks like Poseidon, and I think they're right, given that we're finally able to see what Poseidon looks like, and the actors do look fairly similar. One thing, I think it's funny how we hear Krusty in the background as the trio are talking about going through the secret passageway. And it's funny to see their reactions to what he's saying, but also to hear Annabeth threaten him from the other room. Percy skipping the ferryman's line was such a New York thing to do. I personally hate waiting in lines and probably would have done the same thing as Percy. The regret Annabeth has at least alluded to in this episode is probably to her regret of leaving her father, ever since she began talking about him in episode 4, especially since she didn't want to be reminded by Hermes from the last episode. And when you consider Percy's memory that was brought up last episode was a main factor of this one. Looking back, it's interesting that Cerberus stopped chasing Percy and Grover the closer the two got to Tartarus and Kronos. I mean, that's the most likely reason I think he stopped chasing them. Also, it feels like Hades has such a fresh take on the character in this episode. I heard someone point out that Hades is usually portrayed as a power-hungry, jealous type, but here he doesn't care about power. Or, well, not at least. Just wants his helm back. Well, and he doesn't even care about the bolt until it becomes a matter of self-preservation. Okay, the Master Bolt plot twist doesn't make any sense, at least to me. And given how long that they've had the backpack for, they've had it for more than 3 days at least. And not one time did they look in the bag. They could have discovered the bolt a lot sooner. Although they still would have needed a fast way to get back to New York to return it, which they probably would have still gone over the deadline, but it's still really weird how you didn't know it was in your bag the whole time. In the movie, the hiding place makes more sense, because not at one point did the shield get knocked out of his hand for him to discover the bolt's there. While the movie's version of hiding the bolt made more sense, it also tipped Percy off to who the real lightning thief was a lot sooner than it would have in this show. But I guess we'll figure that out in the finale next week. Anyway, I can't wait for it all to come to a head and the real thief to be exposed in the season 1 finale. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time in the Critic-Verse.